Duvo, who is not in Maryland or in the States at all right now. Nick, where are you?
I'm in sunny St. Lucia, but I thought I would do some shameless plugging for my former alma mater. I found my T-shirt when I was getting dressed this morning, and I thought, yay! So.
Oh yeah, I didn't notice that you graduated from Maryland.
I did, and yeah, this is like the only thing that I have of those days. So I thought, what the heck.
Well, we definitely appreciate it. Give Maryland some love. Well, we have Nick joining us here to do one of our stories, preview a little bit, one of our stories that's airing tonight at 7 o'clock on WMAR 2 News. As many of you know, we have a segment called Voice for Veterans, and that is why we have Nick here. He is the creator of the Logbook Project, and it is a really incredible project that's been going on for about 5 years. I talked with Nick about it for hours and emails before, so I'm excited to be able to preview that story tonight and just kind of chat right now just about this project in general. So Nick, can you just tell us exactly what the Logbook Project is?
So thank you again, Erin, for everything and having me here this morning. It's a real honor. Thanks again. So the Logbook Project is a crazy idea I had to take my father's World War II pilot book, because he served in the Second World War, and send it all around the world to different veterans, wherever they were, from both sides, and just to have them autograph it and to get a little bit of their story. And I've been doing that for we're in the 5th year now, up to 120, 25 signatures, somewhere like that. And it's just been an amazing journey of meeting people from all different cultures and backgrounds and countries, and then of course getting these amazing stories, many of which could be made into a movie on its own.
And I wish I could have the book with me still, or you could have the book, but you've told me before this kind of has a life of its own. The book is traveling all over the world all the time, so it's not like we can sit here and just show it, but we do have lots of video clips and pictures that are going to be on our website later today and are on your website too. Can you quickly plug your Logbook Project?
Oh, sure. And thank you so much. Yes, and the Logbook Project is at www.thelogbook.com now. Of course, I'm telling you that, and I'm just double checking to make sure that that's right.
I have it up too. Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's the logbookproject.com. And you see,
the logbookproject.com. I threw you off.
That's right. Hey, no, you didn't. And in fact, I'm just gonna embarrass my webmaster, Mr. Lars Maki, a little bit here right now, because he was supposed to be here to talk about that, but he gave me some lame excuse about having to pick up his kids. So that's on him. But yes, it's the logbookproject.com. And as I mentioned, Lars contacted me November last year out of Sweden. And he was like, look, I think what you're doing is amazing. Because up to that point, I just had the Facebook page, and we are on Facebook. And he said, I want to help. And I said, well, I really need a website. And he's just, he just like a house on fire. He just built this thing out in a matter of weeks. And I'm so grateful to him, because it really gives us a wonderful platform now to get into the stories in much more the way we want to, and not limited by the restrictions of Facebook.
And even now, the story that I put together for later, and even now just talking, can only touch a small portion of really what this project is and who you've been able to get in touch with. But one of the things I definitely want to start talking about is just how this even happened in the first place. I mean, just that you told me before, it was just, you thought it'd be a cool idea for someone to sign your book, and then it just kind of spiraled from there. So can you take me back to the beginning of really how this project started?
Sure. So I've just always had a natural interest in World War II. Something about it, the scale of it, the number of countries, the number of people, the horrible things that happened, the amazing things that happened, the technology that was developed. It just always fascinated me. So there was that. And then, of course, my father being a veteran, there was that. But the two never really came together. He never really spoke about it. I was too young to ask him the in-depth questions that, oh, gosh, I wish I had 15 minutes with him now. But I never did. So there was a book. There was my natural interest. And then any stories that would pop up, I would just kind of follow along and go, that's really cool. And then one day, a story came up about a Japanese fighter pilot named Kiname Harada. And Mr. Harada served from the very beginning. He was at, well, as far as the US is concerned, he was at Pearl Harbor, although he didn't actually go in and bomb the harbor, but he stayed with the carriers. So he was there. And then he served later on at Guadalcanal. He was at Midway. So, and then he was an ace. And so this story popped up. He was 98 or thereabouts. And there were some interviews. And then later on in life, after the war, Mr. Harada became an outspoken peace activist, because he just felt that what he had seen was so destructive and had ruined so many lives. And he just wanted to get the message out of war. The front lines of war are just so terrible. And that story just, I don't know, it struck a chord in me somehow. And I just thought, wow, what an interesting man. And wouldn't it be amazing if I got him to sign my father's logbook? And I think I mentioned to you before, if it would have been so much easier if I'd come up with this idea and maybe gone to find a local veteran. And there is a gentleman who lives not 10 minutes away from me, as I later found out. But no, I had to send it off to Japan, where I didn't speak the language and where I had no idea really how I was getting it there or back, or even how I was getting in touch with Mr. Harada, who at 98 was not probably very interested to speak to me. But so then I just I started fishing around on the internet. I found a reporter of the story and I made contact, and a message was relayed, and it came back and said, yes, they would sign the book if I could get it over there. So I thought, great. And it just so happened that my boss at the time was on a business trip over to Japan.
That's lucky.
It was totally coincidental. And I should mention too, I did have one contact in Japan, somebody I had dealt with on a business relationship on a separate matter. So the pieces kind of started to come together in a weird sort of a way. And the day finally came when my boss was leaving, and I was up and I thought, hey, all along I was like, hey, this is great, And then the day came to put the book in the envelope and hand it over to my boss. And I was shivering. I broke out in sweats, and every alarm bell in my head was just going off. And it was like, dude, what are you doing? This is nuts, I'm the last of 10 kids. Well, 9 of us now alive. But I didn't say a word to anybody in the family because they would have probably had me committed if they knew what I was about to do. But I went ahead and did it anyway. And even my boss went,
really just like you were nervous because you were afraid that it would get lost in the mail, or
absolutely. I mean, who does that? Who takes a treasured, 75-year-old book that is precious because it's your father's, it's something that he lived through. And even then, Aaron, I didn't really understand all the significance of what was truly in that book. And I can touch on that in a bit. So that even if I appreciate, going back to those 5 years, even I may not have ever done this had I really understood the content of what's in my dad's book. But anyway, I think I may have a few loose screws because I went ahead and I did it. I took the leap of faith. And like I say, my boss was equally horrified, and he tried to talk me out of it. He's like, man, this is nuts. What are you doing? And I said, look, just take it, just go. And he went off, and yeah, there were some sleepless nights for the next couple of days until my contact, a gentleman named Ron Howard over there in Japan, said he got it. He received the book, and I thought, okay, well, first base, great. And then we heard back from Mr. Harada's family again, and they said, look, he's really not doing so well. Try again in a couple of weeks. So I thought, okay, fair enough. And a couple of weeks went by, and then I saw this thing on the news, Mr. Harada died. And, you talk about as I think I've written, there are now moments when you want to go see your favorite movies sold out, or the restaurant you want to go to is closed, or something like that. Like, well, now what? But this was like, okay, now what? Because the book is in Japan. But then, I just suddenly thought, well, what the heck? Japan must have a massive military history given, their whole saga of involvement in the Second World War. So again, I wrote to Ron, and I should say that Ron he's a New Zealander who lives in Japan. So he speaks English very well. He's married to a Japanese lady. But I started chatting with him. I said, look, the guy's dead. Harada is dead. Maybe we can find somebody else. And it was around that time that President Obama was just finishing up his tenure, and he was in Japan, and he made the first speech by a sitting US president at Hiroshima. And there is a photograph, and you can Google it's pretty easy, of him embracing a Japanese survivor of the atomic bombing in Hiroshima. And the gentleman's name that he's embracing is Shigeaki Mori. And it seemed like a really cool story. And then as I started to delve into Mr. Mori's story, it started to become a mind-blow story because, and do you want me to go into all of that at this stage?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about, so I'm going to stop you really fast.
Okay.
So talking about Harada, obviously, and it was just really going back to that, it was a spark. You thought it was this incredible story, wanted him to sign it.
Absolutely.
I believe you're still trying to reach out to another family member to see if they could potentially still sign on Harada's behalf.
Yes. He was married, but his wife too has passed away, but they have a daughter, and I am trying to catch up with her. Haven't succeeded yet. But.
Realistically, even without his signature, this entire project was created because of his story that you saw.
Absolutely. If there was no Kiname Harada, this would never have happened. I mean, maybe somebody else. Gosh.
Feel free to take a drink of water. Yeah. You can take a break. I know you're talking a lot, so I can fill in the gaps too when you want to take a break.
This is a silly frog. Okay. So yes, absolutely. If it wasn't for Mr. Harada's story and that sort of impulse that I had, I don't know that any of this would have ever really, played out the way it did. Maybe I would have seen Mr. Mori's story, but again, I don't. Who knows? When I really go back to how that all really lined up, who knows? Maybe I might have seen Mr. Mori's story on a different day and be like, "Oh wow, that's cool," and just kept moving along. But there was something about Harada's story, and plus him being a pilot too. That did really appeal to me.
Yeah.
Fast forward to right now, today, where the book literally is about to be delivered to a home in California where Mr. Bud Anderson lives. Mr. Bud Anderson is right now the US's most prolific ace World War II pilot alive today with over 16 kills. He is a phenomenal. That's a whole other discussion by itself in terms of his record. But I'm so grateful because the book should, like I say, any minute, any moment now, hopefully should be arriving at his house, and he's going to sign it. There is a little mystique maybe about the pilots, coming back to Mr. Harada, and of course my father being a pilot, that maybe lined up to create that initiative on that first get-go. But other than that, who knows?
And then, so we move on to Shigeaki Mori. He was the actual first real signature in the book.
Yes.
I looked at the picture, just simply Shigeaki Mori signed on that page. But talk to me about his story. I mean, he was a survivor of the atomic bomb at just 10 years old.
Right. So Mr. Mori grew up in Hiroshima. His father, I believe, was a policeman. And from Mr. Mori's school, he could see that there were a couple prisoners of war, U.S. servicemen who had been shot down and were being held at this police station. And Mr. Mori could see that from his school. He could see these guys being held there. And on the day, I guess it was August 6th of 45, he was walking to school, and he was crossing a river somewhere in the city. And the bomb fell, and he got blown off of the bridge and fell into the water. And that's how he survived the initial blast and the heat wave and all of that. He came out of that, of course, into this desolate place, Armageddon, really. Survived all of that. And even that, I don't really have a blow by blow in terms of what his life was really like. And that's something that's still yet for me to discover. There is a wonderful, wonderful documentary out there. It's called Paper Lanterns. It's directed by a gentleman named Barry Freshett. Barry lives in Boston. And I discovered him after I became acquainted with the Mori story. But it's an awesome, awesome documentary about Mr. Mori's story. And I would encourage anybody who's interested, and I'll post a link to look at. Did I send that to you? I think I may have.
You sent me a lot of links, a lot of things. So I'll make sure to link those on our website when we post the story.
That one is absolutely worth watching.
And talking about Mr. Mori, I mean, being a survivor of this is incredible. It's just that story alone is incredible.
It is.
But what really makes him stand out is what happened after that.
Right. So fast forward now, he survives all of that. Of course, he still deals with the legacy of radiation and cancer treatment, by the way. But he gets through that horrendous period of his life. And somewhere, I guess when the monument eventually went up in Japan, so there's that very famous Hiroshima monument where they have the names of everybody who disappeared in that horrible bombing event. Now, I think so. It's probably 100,000 souls maybe. And this thing goes up, and Mori sees that, and of course they're all Japanese, right? And he recalls that there were these American POWs, and something stirs him very much, and he decides, look, those names deserve to be on this wall. They are victims of this bomb. And a little bit, I guess, like me in that sense, where he speaks no English, couldn't even, for many years after the event, of course, this was all classified information. So he had to wait, I think it was until the 70s, to get access to the names of these servicemen who died in Hiroshima. But he got these names, and then he literally went to a library, got a couple phone books. This is a gentleman who speaks no English. And we're talking about a time way before the internet. And he starts to match their last names with people's names in the US. And then he starts to cold call people to try and connect the names. And even, I don't know how long, it took him years, obviously, but his tenacity, his dedication, he eventually just found and linked the families with these servicemen who died. And it was not that, I think it was about, I want to say maybe 4 or 5 of them, but still, I mean, it was just a monumental undertaking that he did. He made the connection. And so now, not only do these families have closure, because of course, all these years later, they had no idea, what happened to uncle and cousin and son, but he now brought closure to these US families as to what happened to their family members. And he got their names inscribed on the Hiroshima Memorial Monument. So it's a phenomenal story of reconciliation, of closure, of just that reaching out across all these cultures, and what was this terrible war that tore apart so many lives, and he's bringing healing. So absolutely, when you begin to peel back the layers of this story, I just thought, wow, what an amazing first signature. And then when he did sign, it was like you said, Shigeaki Mori. And at that point, when I saw his name, I guess the curtains lifted, the doors opened, and I suddenly realized, wow, I'm on the cusp of how many other amazing stories are out there. And so here we are today.
And you found a lot of stories. There are more than 100 signatures in that book, each with their own story from literally all over the place. I do remember you saying that you didn't have a French signature was the one that stood out to you.
The French. Yes, and the irony, of course, is that I come from a French background. My last name is Deveau. It's French. Our family has been in St. Lucia for over 200 years, but we trace our family tree has been well documented, and it goes right back to 2 brothers who came out of France. I think it was the 1600s or something initially. No, must have been later than that, maybe about the 17s. But we've been here a long time. And to this day, I have Russians, I have Germans, I have US, Canadians, I have Indians, I have, of course, from the Caribbean where I am from, but no French. I cannot get, and I even I think since you and I spoke, I've discovered family through my mother's side, actually, who live in Normandy. And I thought, wow, yay. And still, I cannot get anybody from France to say, yes, I will sign the book. No, it's just not. It's like,
well, maybe it'll happen. But for you, what is the real importance of making sure to have a representation from all different entities, from people who served and fought in World War II.
Right. So the thing is, what intrigues me most about this is that, you know, there were some god-awful things that happened during the war. The Holocaust happened. There were, you know, the Japanese treated the brutality visited on prisoners of war in Japanese war camps was equally atrocious. That aside, there is still, for me, tremendous, there's just these insights to be gained by really going into the experience of what it was like to be on the other side. So the German experience, the Japanese experience, and even all the little tiny countries in between that you don't hear about. I mean, you know, when you think of the Allies, you think of New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the US, and Great Britain. But you have other stories within there. You have nations like Poland that were just decimated in the turmoil of the war, that were ripped in half, whose soldiers contributed significant portions at various stages of the war. The Battle of Britain, there's a huge component of that was supported and won by Polish pilots coming over after, because obviously Poland fell early, but you know, and even like after the war was over and you had the Parade of Nations, the Poles were denied that opportunity to march. And so they've lived with these legacy things all these years. And there's all these undercurrents of things that still manifest today in relationships, in diplomatic efforts, in the way different cultures look at each other. So understanding, and of course, I don't pretend to be an expert in terms of the scale of World War II. It's crazy, you know. It would be like, my experience has been literally a teardrop in a Pacific Ocean, you know. And
I know a lot about it.
I know a little bit through the experience, and even, you know, later on, even how I met you is because of something that I only recently discovered, which is another story by itself. So there's more information out there than you could ever point a stick at. I guess, you know, years ago, there was a movie about Abraham Lincoln, and I think Steven Spielberg is the director of that. And one of the things he said in a post-movie interview, he said, you know, I wasn't trying to capture everything about this man, because if you read about him, if you go into, and he wrote extensively, his character is so much deeper than the movie. And he said, what I hope is that people will watch this movie and go and do their own research into Abraham Lincoln. And I feel very strongly that this is the same thing. Here's a little snippet. Here's a little, a tiny little peek at one aspect or a couple of aspects of the war, you know. And if it can fire somebody's imagination to go and learn more and just appreciate the freedoms that we have today that are so fragile, as we've seen. I was on a Zoom conference recently with a British author. Oh gosh, his first name is Alex, and I cannot remember his surname. But anyway, he made an amazing point at the end of it all. He said, you know, we in Europe, we owe our existence today to all the servicemen. And it was an interview with a US serviceman. And he was just saying, you know, how grateful he was to the Americans for coming over and pulling them out of that abyss that they were in. And he said, everything we have today, our democracy, our economies, all of that we owe to the sacrifices that these men came and made for us. And so if people even if they get that, to understand how fragile our systems of governance and democracy and how precious they are and how worth defending and fighting for that they are, you know, then yay team, as my boss would say.
Yeah. Well, and I like how you say that you're hoping that other people will dig a little deeper.
Yeah.
With the story that's going to be airing tonight, we're going to be putting on our website. It only scratches the surface of the conversations that you and I have had, or where the book has been, or different stories. So by doing this, you know, preserving history from the people that you've talked to, but also hopefully sparking some interest in people to dig a little deeper in these stories or these other projects that are happening. And you mentioned too, that it's the preserving history, hearing these stories, but it's also about the connection of these stories. So I wanted to touch on that briefly too, because we have people from around the globe signing this book. And one of the things that really stood out to me was having specifically, and you're going to go into the details for me, but one of the examples that you had was a torpedo going from a submarine to a boat. You got a signature from someone on this end and someone on this end, and connecting the stories. So I know you had a few examples of how stories connect. Is there a one in particular that stands out or that you wanted to share?
Oof, there are several. That early on, as I started to find the stories, the idea of two persons being on opposite ends in the same battle, and then surviving through all of that, and then later on meeting with each other, that was a mind blow for me. Some of these things I never even considered before, right? So there were a couple of examples. I read about a gentleman named Mr. Les Schrenk, and Les was a ball turret gunner who got shot down somewhere off of Denmark, and by a German night fighter. The gentleman's name was Hans Muller. And for whatever reason, and their plane was basically disabled, but still flying. And Hans pulled up next to them, and instead of shooting them out of the sky, which he could very well have done, I should add, the pilot dropped his wheels, which was a sign that, we are surrendering, basically. So the plane pulled up. But I mean, Hans, in later interviews, Hans said he shot down many planes, and for whatever reason, he decided he wasn't going to shoot down this American plane. And he, in fact, escorted them closer to Denmark over the shore, and they were able to parachute and land safely, all except for the pilot, who unfortunately drowned because he landed in a lake. And the Germans would refuse to let the Danish residents save him. So he was the only casualty. But Les survived. He survived that whole ordeal. He became a prisoner of war. He was treated horribly. He went on a death march towards the end of the war. He experienced incredible depravity during his period, but he survived all of that. And he came back to the States. And later on in his life, he thought, he always had this thing in the back of his head. Why did that pilot spare us? Why? And he, through his own, and that's the thing, people are doing searches that you don't even know about. So Les, on his own, spent many years trying to track down this pilot, and eventually he did. And they exchanged correspondence, and Les went to meet him. He went to Germany, and it's all online, it's all documented. There was a Danish film crew that followed them. And these two former enemies, embraced and completely, there was no malice, there was no, you did this or you did. It was just a recognition and mutual respect of two young men called up to service in the defense of their respective countries. And, that in itself was just like, wow, look at this. So I reached out to Les, and Les is a sweetheart. He's still so active online. And I wrote to him, dear Mr. Schrenk, would you? He wrote me back. Of course, the other thing is, and I started this project too late. These ladies and gentlemen are now, the average age is between 98 to 100, 102. So it's with some trepidation that you reach out, because honestly, you don't know, and they could be on their deathbed. They could be so severely restricted. So I actually prefer to go through a gatekeeper of sorts. Mm-hmm. I hate inconveniencing any of these. I hate to think that I would be inconveniencing. So, but anyway, Les is not like that. Les is still very with it. He's current. He's online. And he wrote me back right away. I still have that email, alive and kicking. And yes, I'd be happy to sign the book. And that was a good 4 years ago. And so, yeah, I sent the book off to him. It was one of the fastest turnarounds, other than you, actually. Yeah. Les was, and he's such a character. He didn't even want to go through the book. He literally didn't even want to touch it, because he was like, oh, this is so precious. And I signed it and I sent it back. And he did. Amazing. And then I tried to reach out to the other side of that story, which is Mr. Muller. Mr. Muller, unfortunately, exactly, he was incapacitated. He was alive, but he was deaf. And I don't think he could speak. Oh, no, he was deaf and blind. And so I was not able to get his signature. I still hope actually to get maybe one of his kids. I think I will follow up with that, but it didn't work out. But I mean, he's definitely part of that whole story, and there have been other instances like that with the book where I have a gentleman who survived the bombing of Dresden, Victor Gregg, and that again, all of these are amazing stories. But prior to being at Dresden as a prisoner of war and surviving the horrible firebombing of that city, Victor served in the Battle of El Alamein in North Africa. And opposite him was a gentleman named Gunther Hamm, German, who was personally awarded the Iron Cross by Rommel. Rommel's one of the famous, is called the Desert Fox. He was a German general and he was crafty SOB. And even the English were in awe of this man and his tactical capabilities of warfare. But so these two men were on opposite sides of each other at this very famous battle. And there's a photograph, you can go online. There's two of them, having a glass of wine at some sort of function in England where they brought them together for that purpose. I did manage to get Victor to sign, but unfortunately, Mr. Gunther Hamm died before I could get the book to him. But his wife signed on his behalf. So those are
those are two stories that, I mean, you've told me some of those stories of the connection, but those were two that you haven't told me before. So I'm sitting here kind of, in awe listening, because it is really fascinating to be able to have that connection and to be able to hear those stories. I mean, that was probably my favorite part about this book, is seeing those connections from one end to the other. So of course it's the preserving the history and getting those stories of all of these unique people, but just the connecting those stories from World War II that's what I find the most intriguing with the book. You
just spurred another thought along those lines, is that going back to Mr. Mori, because there were one or two stories about World War II that I knew about from a child growing up. And of course, one of them is the Indianapolis. Mm-hmm. And Jaws, yes, they certainly popularized that whole story. But the whole idea of these men whose ship was torpedoed and then being 3 or 4 days in the open sea, going from 900 down to 300 because of starvation and sharks and all the rest of that. That story was just always a mind blow of itself. So I always knew for sure I wanted one of those veterans to sign the book. And there is such Mr. Edgar Harrell, who was a U.S. Marine aboard the Indianapolis, very kindly signed the book, and I'm so grateful to him. But later on, I began to realize, as you say, these connections, because the Indianapolis was carrying parts for the atom bomb. That was their mission. That was why they were so secret, and that was why when they got torpedoed, that nobody knew to look for them, because it was such a secret mission. They were denied any escort, and their job was just to go deliver the components of this atom bomb to a remote island, I think it was called Tinian, and then sail back. But it was so top secret, they didn't even know what the cargo was. So when they got torpedoed, that was it. Nobody was looking for them until like 3 days later, and then they started to realize, hang on, this ship is overdue. Where is it? So, but here you have these men carrying the components for this bomb that then fell on Hiroshima, that then blew Mr. Mori into the river, Yeah. So it's a more of a stretch of a connection, but it's still a connection nonetheless. And it's, mind blowing. Yeah.
And I mean, the stories just continue and continue. We could be on here for hours.
Yeah, we could.
I definitely want to stress again your Facebook or your website, the Logbook
Project. And thank you. Yes.
We got that under control. Yes. And we'll have a link to that on WMAR2news.com.
Thank you.
Well.
That's so awesome. Thank you.
We've talked a lot about these stories, and tonight we have I guess I never touched on why I'm talking to you, how I met you, what's going on. So we've been talking about this Logbook Project, but haven't really dove into how we got connected and how the book even came to Maryland. So I'm not going to give a lot away. You're not going to give a lot away, because we have the story airing tonight at 7 o'clock on WMAR2news.com. But I mean, WMAR2 News, and then of course it'll be on our website. Awesome. But just a brief, without trying to give anything away, Nick contacted me after seeing a story that I did in 2019 when we first launched The Voice for Veterans on WMAR2 News.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yes.
I didn't know it was a first launch.
So he wasn't our first one. We started it in 2019. So we launched Voice for Veterans in 2019. This gentleman was one of the first that I interviewed. But he saw the story online. There was some key information in the story that he just kind of honed in on, contacted me. Book flew here from Japan. I had to send it to another state, and I had it for a day, 24 hours, maybe.
You were amazing. You made my head spin how fast you turned that. Plus, and you got a signature and an interview in all of that.
We were quick, but I also was nervous, to be honest, to have that book. Hold it. I mean, I looked through it, but I looked through it once.
As are many people.
Closed it up, put it away. I was scared to mess it up. Definitely valuable. And the veteran that we got to sign it was also a little wary to hold it for too long or look at it too long. So we will have that full story on our website, WMAR2 News later today, but it is airing tonight at 7 o'clock. So we will have that on there. You'll see who the veteran is and why Mr. Dubois wanted him to sign it. Now, before we go, is there anything else that you wanted to add? Give a little shout out to your team? Anything?
Yes. Oh gosh, yes. If you would let me. Well, let me just add a little footnote to that. Everything you just said is that there is, talking about connections, there is a connection to the veteran with another signatory from the DC area. As we discovered, as you pointed out to me after he signed, which was was such a cool thing that we didn't know about. It's a post-war connection, but a connection nonetheless. And so, can I mention that veteran?
Sure. Yes.
Yeah, Nessie Godin. Okay. She is a Holocaust survivor, and I got her signature in the logbook in 2017 because obviously I went to Maryland, so I still have family in there. So I was up visiting my sister, and I had contacted the museum before and they had arranged for a gentleman named Mr. David Bayer, who is also a Holocaust survivor. But on the day in question, when I had my appointment set up, he was ill and he was not even at the museum. But this everyday Holocaust survivors go to tell their stories at the Holocaust Museum. So the day in question when we went, this lady was there, Nessie Godin, and Nessie is a survivor of 5 death camps. And at the end of the war, she was among a group of 1,000 people who were death marched, and she was one of 200 survivors of that experience. And so she was there at the museum that day, and she signed the book. And yeah, so that was, and I mean, it was awesome and it was amazing, and we were so happy to have her signature. And then, and I should shout out Mr. Stephen Vito, who's a researcher at the Holocaust Museum, who made all of that happen for me, and his colleague Emily. But fast forward to you and this whole story, and when you went to present to the gentleman, who we will find out more about tonight, he goes, "Oh yeah, Nessie, this Nessie," and he pulled out a magazine, and there they both were, and so that was so amazing, and I'm still blown away by that. So
I thought it was so cool. When I was talking to him, I kept saying this connection, like, because we kept talking about the connections and the signatures. I was like, this is amazing, and he's like, "What do you mean? Like, we're here?"
Yeah.
It's just
So that was awesome. But yes, so there's that. But yes, if you could just, because the other part of this story is that, of course, it's about the veterans, but the backstage story of all of this is persons like you, Aaron McPherson, who have been, just stalwarts of assistance, who this would never happen without. And there are people like you all. I have this little sort of this grassroots army of people like yourself who have made this project work, and it just never would have happened without you, and on all of you. And I owe, and so everybody's vested in this, and that's been probably the most tremendous part of this journey for me, is meeting people like yourself and the outpouring of support that I get for this project. And the similar thing, like, "Oh my God, what are you doing? Are you nuts? You're sending this by mail?" Oh, and then they get the book and it's like, "Oh, okay, all right, I've sent it." And then I write back and I say, "Okay, the book's arrived." And they're like, oh. In fact, somebody said recently, her response was, "Phew, WHEW. And I said, you know what, I'm gonna form a little club called the Few Club, because that's just a everybody's reaction when the book arrives at its next destination is
that's how I felt. That's exactly what I felt, because it took a long time to go where I said.
Oh my gosh,
I was like, I'm going to be in charge of losing this book. What's going to happen? Not about it.
And I accepted that a long time ago. I accepted that this book could be lost, destroyed, burned, stolen at any given point in time. It could. It's a huge risk that I have taken. But I'll tell you what, the rewards and the experiences I've had pale, when I say in comparison, they are so much bigger than the loss of the book. And we have everything documented. Of course, I would weep, but the experiences have been so worth it. And so, I do want to shout out a couple of people. Mr. Ross Stewart, he is a curator of the Wethersfield Air Base over in England, which housed the 416th Bombardment Group. And there's a reason why that's significant, because of a family friend whose uncle was in the 416th. And when she found out that I was doing this, she was actually having a reunion of the 416th folks in Washington, D.C. This is around the same time that Nessie signed, actually.
Okay.
Oh, no, it was a year. Anyway, so Mr. Ross Stewart was visiting from England because of that reunion, and he found out about the project, and I got a phone call, and he was like, look, this is so amazing. Can I help you? And I was like, sure, and he took the book with him back to England. I was around the time I was trying to get Mr. Victor Gregg to sign, actually, now that I remember that. And Ross went physically with the book and presented it to Victor. Victor was the gentleman at Dresden. And so there's photographs of Ross and Victor. And Ross has just been, I call him my UK-based associate, because he helps me move the book all through Europe. And this couldn't happen without that. Yeah. And then there's been other folks like him. Of course, Lars McKee, who we mentioned already, who's built a website. More recently, there's folks like Todd DePastino. Todd runs an amazing nonprofit in Pittsburgh. It's called the Veterans Breakfast Club. And anybody who's interested in anything veteran, not just World War II, but current events, things like insurance, things like where can vets go to get help on various things. Amazing program that he runs, and they do several webcasts during the week. And he's helped me find other signatures in the book. He's been a huge, huge support. And then Mr. Mike Meir is another one. Mike's father served aboard on a U.S. oiler called the Mississinawa. And the Mississinawa was sunk by a Japanese torpedo, a manned torpedo called a Kaiten. And that is a whole other, we'd be here forever. So I won't go into it, but Mike is an author. His father served aboard that ship. He's now passed away. There are no more survivors from that ship, but Mike has given me huge support and is encouraging me to write the book now. So and I'm sure I'm leaving out many other people, as my buddy Nikolai Mongrou up there in Maine, who has also helped me, my cousin in Arizona, Esther, and then some of my own family members, Simone, Mary, Paula, Annabelle, Susan. I have 6 sisters, did I tell you? Yeah. But so each of them have sort of gotten involved and gone out and met a veteran and got signatures. So that's been a cool experience for them. I have a sister in Australia, Susan, and she went and helped me get a gentleman who has experienced the most insane brutality at the hands of Japanese at the time. So all of these people, and there are many, many more, and there's many probably going to be like, oh, you didn't say. So I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. There's over 100 signatures. I can't, speak to everybody, but thank you, Aaron, for giving me that opportunity to plug all these various people, because that's so important.
It's a lot of people to make it happen. Even yourself, this is something that you do on the side. I think it's important to note that Nick is a musician and an accountant.
Yes, I count beans, and that's what pays the bills. Mm-hmm. But at some point now, in fact, Mike Meir, who I just mentioned, Mike is really pushing me to write that book. He's like, look, you really need to start getting the outline going. And he's right, because otherwise this will linger on. And I do, everything has its time. And it is getting to be time to wrap this up. I would like to get the French to sign before, but, with or without them, the ship has sailed. Yeah. It's time to start wrapping this thing up. So this program and everything you've done, Aaron, again, I really, really want to thank you, because the timing of this too is such a wonderful it's helping us to ramp up the publicity for all of these things, and it's so helpful. So again, thank you to you and your team.
No problem. And thank you for, reaching out and finding us. I mean, I got really excited about this story when you reached out. I mean, everybody thought I was crazy too. They were like, what, you can't touch this and do this and what's going on? So,
and then COVID.
Exactly.
COVID.
There's a lot of other factors happening into it, but it really is a really cool project. So I'm happy to be able to highlight it. And, we've been talking for about 45 minutes on here. That's half of what we did our interview on.
I know,
so and the piece that's airing tonight is only a few minutes long. So I hope that I wrapped it in a nice little bow for everyone.
Yeah.
And I have to give a shout out to my photographer, Manny Locke, as well, who worked with me on this project.
Absolutely.
But that full piece is, again, airing tonight on WMAR 2 News at 7 o'clock. So that'll be on tonight, and then it'll be on our website. We'll make sure you get a link. The website is up here on the screen as well, WMAR2news.com/voice for veterans. We'll have some links on there people can follow, some more information. So thank you again, Nick, for reaching out and helping us do this story, and we'll keep it going.
And lastly, and thank you again, there's just one other thing that, because I'm from the Caribbean, there is a move right now to try and put up a monument in a place called the Arboretum. I can never say that word, in England. There's a place where they have monuments to all the various nationalities that fought. And there's a gentleman right now, his name is Donald Campbell, and he's trying to get sponsorship to build a memorial to West Indians, because again, that's another part of the story it's not told, but many people from where I live, this part of the world, we were all British dependencies, and so many of these people came and sacrificed themselves in one way or another. So I just wanted to plug Donald and the work he's doing as well. But thank you, Erin. Thank you so much. Thank you.
We're playing the music that we have to sign off now. I don't have any music to play, but
okay, well.
Yes, but thank you again, Nick. I appreciate it. The Logbook Project.com.
Oh gosh, you're pushing it more than I am. So thank you.
Well, because there's so much information, it blows my mind, and it's awesome. So hopefully people will check out the story and then check out more afterwards.
Yes, and do your own research. And hopefully, when COVID is a thing of the past and I'm back in Maryland, we can sit and have a beer and just
be able to catch up in person once it's safe to do so. For sure.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Nick, again, for taking the time to chat with us today. And hopefully you enjoy the piece that airs tonight.
Oh, the little preview you did was so wonderful, and I'm so looking forward to seeing it. So thank you. And I should plug St. Lucia, right? My little island nation. They would shoot me if I didn't. So, it's a pretty little island. Do come and visit when you can, and then open invitation.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, Nick.
Take care. Bye-bye.